Hello, everybody. I'd like to welcome you to our webinar from ISPMA and the iSQI. Thank you very much for joining us today. Today, the topic will be how to create a killer roadmap from scratch. Before we start with the actual topic, I'd like to do a short introduction. Greg Prickril, ISPMA Extended Board Member, and I, Marcel Schwarzmeier from the iSQI, will guide you through this presentation. I will start with giving you some general information about iSQI, who is the international certification body of ISPMA. Afterwards, I will hand over to our expert, who will talk about how to create the killer roadmap from scratch. Please feel free to ask questions by using the chat or question function. We will be happy to answer your questions after the webinar. For those who haven't been in contact with the iSQI before, some facts and figures before we start. iSQI have been founded in 2004 in Potsdam, Germany, and now we have have 3 subsidiaries worldwide in the Netherlands, UK, and the US. Until today, we conducted 150,000 exams on 6 continents in 90 countries and 10 languages. We're working together with over 500 invigilators who are conducting exams globally. Next slide, please. I would like to explain the cooperation model between ISPMA, the International Software Product Management Association, certification bodies, and the training providers. The cooperation is based on the certification process ISO IEC 17024, which divides the responsibilities for each party strictly. ISPMA published and maintains the curriculum, the glossary, and the certification procedure for the CSPM, foundation level, and the excellence level. The certification tests are conducted by iSQI, an independent certification body. ISPMA does not conduct trainings. International training providers develop the trainings material and conduct the training based on the syllabus. Next slide, please. Here you see our product portfolio, which contains certification in many different areas. We started in 2004 with software testing, and now we offer certification in usability, requirements engineering, mobile app testing, or software product management. As software product management is a very important topic and the demand for certification in this area is growing constantly, we will give you some insights today. Now I'd like to hand over to Greg. Please enjoy the presentation.
Hi, everybody. So happy you could be with us today. I am the CEO and only employee of Prickril Consulting. I do product management and product strategy consulting, training, and coaching. I was a product manager for maybe 15 or 16 years at some of the biggest software companies in the world. I've worked in North America. I now live in Europe and worked in Brazil for several years. I have done Lean and Scrum a bunch of times, and I'm now getting active in the Scaled Agile framework. I'm a certified program consultant and speak here and there at universities. The goals for today, I would like to introduce you to ISPMA. I will describe what a roadmap is. We will discuss how roadmaps get used, and then I will talk about defining what I call a practice for creating a roadmap, indeed from scratch. And I will give you some tips on how you can take this approach and use it in your organization. ISPMA is a nonprofit organization supporting product management in industry and academia. The slides that I have say over 800 members, but I think it's closer to 1,000 now. This is our framework, which is designed to give you an end-to-end perspective on software product management. If you look at the bottom, there are a couple of columns that are core software product management activities, both strategic and more operational. That's what we call planning. We believe product managers orchestrate the activities of the disciplines you see in the 4 rightmost columns. And then product managers also manage up within the organization where they work. They participate. in higher level processes like portfolio management, resource management, those kinds of things. So that lays the basic framework for how we see product management end to end. We have curriculum and certifications that conform to the blocks you see here. So there is foundation level training. So we as ISPMA, as Marcel said, publish the syllabus. You take a course, you get certified at the foundation level. We now have excellence level trainings as well, corresponding to some of the blocks that you see in the framework. So you can also get certified in strategic management, product strategy, those areas that you see there. So the foundation level is about giving you end-to-end perspective. You can think of excellence level as deep dives into these areas. So we've done training all over the world. I've done it all over the world. We now have an option of taking the ISPMA exam where you live in a Pearson VUE test center. And as an individual, you can join ISPMA for free, join our community, participate in events. We're excited. We will have our first kind of public event next year. So if you would like more information, you can just go to the site. You can send email to info. And please don't hesitate to contact me if you have any questions. If I can't answer it, I'll refer you to the right folks. And with that, we will jump right into today's topic. And I'm big on definitions. So people talk about roadmap, but what is it? Well, it's a really critical artifact for the product management discipline, including software product managers. And I look at it as demonstrating how you are going to deliver to the market based on your strategy. So it is inherently a strategic document. And more, the way I position it with my clients is that it represents the transition from strategy or planning to execution. It's right in the middle of those two. And I think of roadmaps as comprising two types of information. There's a roadmap diagram, which most of us are familiar with, but the diagram itself is not sufficient. We also need business context around that. And I will talk about both those types, and then we will jump into how you can create an organizational practice so that roadmaps are created efficiently, effectively, and consistently. By the way, who is accountable for the roadmap? When I start working with a client, that's the first question I ask. I say, who owns the roadmap? And without a doubt, this is a product manager's deliverable. It may be the most important deliverable that you create as a product manager. So others will collaborate, they will help enrich it. You're not going off in a corner by yourself as a product manager and creating it, but you are accountable for making sure that the roadmap is there, that it's up to date, and that it reflects a compelling strategy. So I talked about the diagram. When most of us think about a roadmap, we think about this kind of graphical representation typically. And there are a few different graphical representations. This is what I call the milestone type. This is kind of public facing, very markety. And you can see that in 2010, 2012, and so forth, there are various releases of Microsoft Dynamics. This thing is pretty dated, by the way. It's just an example that I use. You can see at the top of the columns, or the milestones, they show version numbers. And then with each one, they show investments. If you look, for example, in the third column, one of the items is next-gen usability. What does that mean? Well, you need more detail to figure that out. So I tend to refer to these as roadmap items or elements, sometimes investments. The point is they're not necessarily specific features that are going to be delivered. They may be more thematic. More and more I see this style roadmap. It's a Gantt chart. There are a lot of products now aimed at product managers. And this is clearly the most popular representation. I consider this an inward-facing artifact. I think it's valuable to help the team track what they're working on and when things will be developed. In my experience, customers really don't care how long you work on things or when you work on things. They want to know when those things will be delivered. Thus, in my career, I used more the milestone type. And an interesting way to capture them is in a mind map. I'm a big fan of mind maps. You can do interesting things with color coding and icons and so forth to show things like priority, show which release different features are associated with. But that's the graphical part. If you choose to create a graphical roadmap, some people create them as a list, but I think typically to show them to stakeholders, it will be converted to one of these graphical representations. And one of the most common questions I get when I'm working with clients on road mapping is, what is the right level of detail? Similar question to requirements management. When do I know my requirements are detailed enough? But with a roadmap, I've got to balance these opposing forces. I don't want to make too specific a set of commitments because that just sets me up to fail. It doesn't give me the flexibility I need. But if I underspecify the roadmap, stakeholders may not understand exactly when I'm going to do what and may choose to pick a vendor who gives them more detail. So you have to be careful, but I think the prevailing rule is be as vague as your stakeholders and circumstance will let you be. You clearly want to show your strategic intent, you want to show what you're going to deliver to the market, but you want to give yourself some wiggle room in terms of scope and timing and so forth. By the way, in each representation of the roadmap, we saw single line descriptions. As I mentioned before, that's not sufficient. So each item or element on the roadmap in some way needs to be elaborated. So that is the graphical part of road mapping. I also mentioned that roadmaps comprise business context, and think of this as the minimal amount of business or commercial information that a reader would need to interpret your roadmap, to understand it. So I'm not talking about a full strategy document, although very often the roadmap is part of a broader strategy document. But here I want to give folks some insight into my strategy, maybe a little insight into the markets I intend to serve and so forth. But the key word there is minimal. What's the minimal amount of information I can give, context I can give them, so that they can understand why I plan to deliver what I'm showing that I will deliver. So that's what a roadmap is. Strategic artifact shows how I will deliver against my strategy to the market. I will now talk about the process. So rather than just the specific artifact, how do I create a roadmap? And this is a common question. And some unfortunate folks that maybe work in small companies or work in companies where there's not a strong product management function find themselves with this kind of blank page syndrome. They're told to create a roadmap, or they know that they should, and they don't know where to start. So I use the term practice. It's a little more flexible in my mind than saying this is a process description. Product managers are knowledge workers. Every time you do a roadmap, it'll be a little bit different. So what knowledge workers need is some good guidance, not point by point steps that they have to follow, but some guidance on how you can start, where to start, and what you do to create a roadmap. And these practices can be customized per organization and probably should be. When we think about starting the road mapping practice, there are certain triggers that will cause me to either update or to create a new roadmap. So if I'm creating a new product, I need a roadmap. Even if I'm just pitching an idea, I may want to show how I plan to deliver over time. We update the roadmap with new releases. Roadmaps incorporate various assumptions about capacity, timing, partnerships, all kinds of things. And if one of those change, I may need to update the roadmap. And then very often we update roadmaps for events. Here I put external events. It could be internal as well, but maybe a trade show, customer meeting, those kinds of things. What is the objective of creating a practice? Well, we want to increase the effectiveness or influence of the product management function. I said product management owns the roadmap, and this is your key opportunity to demonstrate that you're thinking strategically and that you are planning strategically. We want the road mapping process to be as efficient as possible, and we want to make sure it's timely, going back to the triggers that we mentioned. Many organizations have standards or should have standards about what's incorporated in a roadmap, even the template. So we want to conform to standards. And a biggie is that we want to make sure that product managers are engaging with the right stakeholders. So creating a roadmap is a very collaborative activity. You've got internal stakeholders like executive leadership, engineering, marketing, a lot of external stakeholders like customers, partners. So the practice should guide product managers to engage with the right folks at the right time. So this is a high-level description of the phases that I would see in a road mapping practice. Once again, these aren't a bunch of prescriptive sequential steps, just kind of phases that you progress through. So first I do preparation, and I will go into each one of these in detail. This is an area where folks don't invest enough time, and I think the overall efficiency of creating the roadmap suffers. Once we've prepared, we create a draft roadmap based on collaboration with others, requirements that we have. We then go into a validation phase, and these phases have more to do with emphasis than really being sequential. So in the validation phase, I can still be adding to the draft. There may be some preparation for various things that I'm still doing, but most of my time is spent on validating what I have and updating it. You should not see this as waterfall. This is just a simplified representation of how you can think about progressing through roadmap creation. At some point, I'm going to publish that. That sounds more like a specific event, maybe, but there are actually, multiple activities that could be involved with that. And then rollout is really critical. So I need to get my roadmap, the plan of record that's been validated, out in front of folks so that they're aware of what I'm doing and hopefully get excited about what I'm doing and want to get involved. So let's go through each phase in turn. In the preparation phase, I am pulling together all the information and people that I need to do the roadmap. And like anything else, the better I prepare, the smoother things are likely to go. So I want to think about the resources that I'm going to need, the timing. I want to start talking to stakeholders and tell them that I'm going to need their input or their validation for the roadmap. I am forming a team as necessary. I might have a core team comprising PMs, engineering, maybe some Q folks. I would recommend doing a kickoff meeting for these folks, doing a high-level project plan. I'm not talking about necessarily a detailed Microsoft project plan, but put together the goals, what you're trying to accomplish, key milestones, when you think you'll have a draft ready, when the roadmap finally needs to be prepared and presented. So here you'll be working primarily with the product team and also executive leadership, letting them know what's going on. And you can move on or start thinking about activities in the next phase. Once you've got the team formed, you have a nice plan, and you've collected the data that you need. That is a big part of the preparation phase. So the mistakes I see people making there are not investing enough time in planning. That's really important, thinking about when you need to get this done, setting expectations so that you're not running behind people trying to, get them to validate or give you input. We can sometimes forget important stakeholders like partners. Everybody thinks about customers, but maybe our partners are important. Other product groups can be really important stakeholders. And then not collecting all the data that we need, and I'll talk about that in just a moment. I would suggest engage as early as you can with key stakeholders. Do create a little plan artifact, but make it very lean, just to let people know, as I said, what you're trying to achieve. And identify key gaps, and don't gate just because you don't have all the information you need. You rarely do, but put a plan in place to gather the information so that maybe as you're drafting, the roadmap, you're also collecting and closing those gaps. So what are the key inputs that I look for when I'm preparing? I call it business motivation. Some people call it strategy. So I need to understand what the organization is trying to achieve. That may be the corporation, business unit, or both. And as a product manager, you should define a strategy for your product. What are you trying to achieve? The roadmap will show what you're going to deliver in order to achieve it. You need a backlog of requirements, and those come from all your stakeholders. Very nice to have some good market analysis. What are the key trends? And you're going to do detailed stakeholder analysis, because as product managers, we have many, many stakeholders. We can't manage them all. You need to understand which ones are most important, and those are the ones who you are going to engage with the most in creating the roadmap. So there are a lot of other information sources. I've got a list of those and plan to blog about that fairly soon. But once again, in the preparation phase, a key activity is just gathering all the information, making sure you have the latest information, making sure you understand it before you start trying to actually create the roadmap. So the next phase is the drafting phase, and here we're just going to create the first roadmap. And this is iterative. As I said, this is not waterfall. I'm not going off, on the mountaintop and drafting and then going into validation. But the emphasis here is on creating it, doing short iterations so that I show it to my most important stakeholders and try to get it to a state that's reasonably stable so that I feel like it really represents a plan of record. And here I've really got to balance a lot of things overall. I've got to balance features that I'm doing for customers versus features that are aimed toward the market. I need to balance the needs of internal and external stakeholders. Here I will start identifying what the elements or what the items are that I'm going to put on the roadmap. I will try to find an organizational template. So right from the get-go, I'm capturing this in a standard way. You will start drafting the business context, so you can think of those as two related streams. I need to create the diagram and then summarize the business context so that people understand the why behind the roadmap. And here I'm talking a lot to engineering because capacity is an important determining factor regarding what I can deliver when. I'm getting feedback from marketing and sales to make sure that they feel like they can market it so that sales feels like this is something they're comfortable taking out and positioning. Yeah, and at each phase, I'm looking at my business motivation, at my documented strategy, and I am making sure that it's clear that my roadmap is delivering on my strategy. You can leave this phase when you have a solid, reasonably stable version, when you've shown it to the internal stakeholders and maybe there's still some questions or some disagreement, but it's reasonably stable. And that is just something you have to feel. You should not think that after the drafting phase, you won't change it. The roadmap is really a living artifact and will change all the time as assumptions and so forth change. And I would look to have general buy-in on kind of the core product team. So I wouldn't expect to have big points of contention with engineering. I would expect marketing and sales to be online. I would imagine executive leadership would look at this thing and say, yeah, this reflects what we expect. In a mature organization, there are going to be versions of the roadmap. We talked about all the different stakeholders. So I always had, as a PM, a master version that had everything in there. By the way, that's not just customer-facing features. If there is technical debt that engineering is going to have to invest in, that needs to be reflected in there somehow. You, as a PM, should be making decisions about where development calories get invested. But you might have the inward-facing that's a little more complete, talks about maybe big bugs you have to fix or re-architecting that you have to do. Very common to have one that you would share with customers. You may need to make an even simpler one, which we saw in the Microsoft version that is public facing. And we even created special roadmaps for market analysts. For example, for that audience, we really wanted to underscore innovation. So multiple versions, all based on a master version. In the drafting phase, the mistake I see is that the roadmap just seems kind of like a random jumble of things. It should tell a strategic story. Sometimes we don't have the right level of abstraction. I can't tell what something is, or the items aren't parallel. One is like super detailed, one is super general. That can be confusing. And once again, we will go into a validation phase, but you should be validating all the time. So while I'm drafting, I would get as much informal validation as I can from stakeholders that I have a good relationship with, engineering, executive leadership, customers. I would make sure that my internal stakeholders feel happy and that they're behind the roadmap. If they're not, that will come back and bite me later. And you can already start thinking, once you have a reasonably solid draft, about practicing how you will present it, what the story is, and how you will weave the context into the overall dialogue. That's a good idea. And then we move on to the validation phase. And here we're just going to a little more formally approach stakeholders. Your organization may have specific sign-off requirements, and you would manage those. So you're getting feedback, updating, moving this thing to the point where your key stakeholders are happy with it. So here you should continue doing stakeholder analysis, figuring out which ones are really the most important, getting the formal sign-off and making sure it's recorded somewhere. Your key stakeholders, I already mentioned. You will want to talk to some customers. You should also remember that customers and markets are not the same thing. You can make your customers happy and fail to further penetrate the market. So you would look for some interesting market proxies. Those could be prospects, those could be industry analysts, those could be, any number of entities who can give you input about the market. And think of the market as the customers you don't have yet. And you can leave this phase once you have sufficient buy-in so that people feel like, yeah, this is an executable plan and will move us towards our vision. And once you've got, formal sign-off, when and if that's required. One of the mistakes I see here, it's very hard sometimes for product managers to say no, but if you try to please all your stakeholders, you will fail. So you need to understand strategically what you're trying to achieve and not water down your roadmap so that you don't really please anybody or that you don't delight anybody. I would get internal feedback before I shared it too much externally, because if you don't, you can end up looking like the organization isn't aligned. And then sometimes, you need something concrete, like an email, if there's not a more formal sign-off process, so that stakeholders tell you, yeah, this looks good. Yeah, so the suggestions would be start internally, then work externally. And at this phase already, make sure that you have the right versions for different stakeholders. You don't necessarily want to show customers the same one that you show engineering. The next phase is a little unlike the others. It should be very brief, but still takes some thinking. You need to publish the roadmap in the right place. Ideally, your organization has a repository where all roadmaps go. You want to, at that point, basically enter version control, which means any material change is going to generate a new version and update folks. And without a doubt, your roadmap will change over time. If a new product release was the trigger for updating the roadmap, scope will go up or down. You will commit, decommit things, and the roadmap needs to be updated, but that needs to be done in a transparent way so that people know that the roadmap is actually changing. And you can leave this phase when the roadmap is actually published, people are aware of it, and it's under version control. So in the publishing phase, there are only so many mistakes you can make, but I would make sure that it's in a repository that manages access at a fairly granular level. So you're controlling who can access it and who can change it and so forth. Finally, we have the rollout phase, and this is super important. I see people overlook this, and it's interesting. They put so much work into getting the roadmap together, and maybe they show it to stakeholders when they ask, but you should actually put a plan together to roll this out. You want stakeholders to see, especially if they've given you feedback, what the final plan of record is, or what the current plan of record, with the expectation that that will evolve as necessary. So you need to plan the rollout. Who are you going to show this to when? You should start probably with the broad engineering team. Sometimes engineering leadership is involved in creating the roadmap, but rank and file individual developers don't know what's on the roadmap. You should address that. You should think about opportunities to reach customers, whether that's one-on-one or maybe a group of customers. You should think about trade events that are coming up because you might want to get marketing approval or leadership approval before you show a roadmap publicly. So it takes some planning and then just execution, going out and showing people so that your key stakeholders are aware of what you plan to deliver. So in terms of the rollout phase, I would consider creating like a video. So don't do it all live. Maybe for engineering, you create a video, you present it once. Maybe you just do a screen capture, narrated screen capture, so that people can watch that unattended. And make sure that you define a channel for feedback so that when people see it, they can, tell you what they like, what they don't. We talked about making a killer roadmap. What makes a roadmap killer? It needs to be detailed enough to inform stakeholders, but should be vague enough so that you have some flexibility in what you deliver when. A killer roadmap is tailored for its intended audience. So each type of stakeholder has different expectations and they may need to see a different roadmap. It should tell a great story around the strategy. So this shouldn't just seem like ho-hum, operational, this is what we're gonna do. You should tie it through the context to the broader strategy, and it should be inspiring. People should think it's great and get excited about either buying it or contributing to, delivering the roadmap. There's this balance between what the market wants, what you can actually build, and what will sell, so that you meet your business objectives. That's the balancing those three dimensions. And a killer roadmap has really good business context. It's not just a diagram. The diagram is not enough. You need to explain people why that's what you plan to do. So what I would recommend, I've shown you a very quick example of a practice. It's expressed, I think, in a very simple term, just a set of phases. Each phase, we identify what the key activities are, who's involved. You might have resources, links to resources like templates and so forth. It should allow people to deviate. This isn't about forcing people down a series of steps every time. It's about giving them guidance. If you have good product managers, you give them some guidance, they will fill in kind of the blanks. You could think about using a wiki or some other communal editing experience to capture the practice. And what I would consider doing is start describing it just in a presentation. You're going to have to present it to people anyway. I would avoid, like writing tons of text. Your job is to think about somebody in your organization who isn't sure where to start with a roadmap and give them kind of a reasonable trail to follow to get it created at a level of quality that will be acceptable in the organization. So you can take the slides that I've put together, you can take those phases, you can tweak them a little bit, elaborate them, socialize those, have other people collaborate, and over time, you will find that there is more consistency and efficiency in creating roadmaps. Actually, before I thank you, I think there's a slide that somehow got hidden. I would like to show you just a quick example of a roadmap artifact. I don't think this is a mature, complete artifact. Think of this as more like what your draft will look like. You can see it has a title. You track document history, nice table of contents, list the product team, so if folks have questions, they can get to you. This type of artifact is definitely inward facing. I would give folks an overview of what the solution or what the product does. I always talk about the problem space. This will be a roadmap for a camera surveillance solution. So these are the problems that are solved. Little kind of almost elevator pitch or quick summary about what the product is. It's nice to give people a use case so they understand, usage of the product. They really understand what they're reading. A marketecture goes a long way. Then I would share the business motivation. So what is your vision? Because the roadmap should show how you're delivering to the market in a way that will help you achieve your vision. And then I would share key goals and objectives. What are you trying to achieve? And people should be able to draw that line. And when you present the roadmap, you will tie together this business motivation with the roadmap artifact. You know, you can talk about scope. What's the functional scope of the product? Kind of what's in the box? What do you get? I think it's really important to talk about which markets you're going to serve and not serve. Who are the customer stakeholders? Are you trying to make end users happier? Are you making changes so that it's easier for economic buyers to make decisions about the product? Some segments, talk about the people at the customers who will use your product, you know, their decision makers, end users, those kind of folks. I think it's interesting to include how you plan on positioning the product. Are you seen as the lowest cost alternative? Are you a premium offering? How should people think about it? And then you have a roadmap. And you know, we talked about this at kind of a high level, but you can see here is a 3-milestone roadmap. This is the way I tended to do them. The first milestone shows the next release. It tends to be fairly detailed. And you can see that I'm not committing to a specific date. I'm committing to Q4 2016 or 2017. The dates don't matter so much. You can see less than a year later, I plan to deliver the next version. The items here in the roadmap tend to be less precise than in the previous one. And then I would do a third turn of the crank, this third milestone, and that is just things I'm thinking about in the future. So if your stakeholders will let you do this kind of thing, they may demand that, you know, they need the roadmap to go out further. They may need more detail, but your going in position should be to tell a nice strategic story, give yourself some wiggle room around the dates and the scope, and yeah, your stakeholders will really take way more away from your roadmap than they will from any kind of strategy presentation or anything like that. Really critical. So that is an example of a draft. If you don't have something like this put together, you can put it together in, you know, a few days. Doesn't have to be, you don't have to go off site for 3 days in a row. Just start putting it together. Figure out what context you need to show for people to understand why you're delivering these things. Create a draft, start socializing it, and it will grow and evolve naturally based on the feedback you get. So I would like to thank you very much for your time. I think hopefully we all feel like we're kind of in going, you know, it's downhill from here through the end of the year. Next year, I'll have some big announcements regarding PM practices. So if you're interested in this approach to road mapping or release planning or defining strategy, just send me your email, and when we're ready to announce things next year, I would be happy to update you. If you have any questions or comments, you can reach me at greg@prickril.com. And I wish you all very happy holidays and a prosperous 2018.
Thank you very much.
So I think, Marcel, you said that we would take questions if there were any.
Yeah. Thank you very much, Greg, for the presentation. It was very interesting. And if you have any questions right now, you can ask, use the question function. Otherwise, as Greg was saying, you're always free to contact us directly if you have any more detailed question. There are no questions popping up from my side.
All righty. Thanks, everybody, for your time, and happy holidays.
Happy holidays. Thank you. Bye.
Bye-bye.